The default DTP mode depends on the Cisco iOS software version you're using and the platform of switch. In this example, I've got two switches that I've just booted up. In other words, they have no configuration. Here's switch 1. And let's change the name to switch 1. Here's switch 2. So let's see what DTP mode these switches are using. You can view DTP settings by using the command show DTP, interface, and specifying an interface. So I'll specify gigabit 00, which is this link over here. What we can see in the output is that DTP is enabled. The mode at the moment is access port. So the switch has negotiated with switch 2 to use an access port rather than a trunk port. And the reason why is because it's configured for dynamic auto, not dynamic desirable. As an example, show interface gigabit 00 switch port shows us, I'll just make this bigger, that this port gigabit 00 is configured for dynamic auto as the administrative mode, and the operational mode or mode that it's using at the moment is static access. DTP negotiation is on, but because it's configured for dynamic auto, it ends up being an access port. On this side, show DTP interface gigabit 00. You can see that it's negotiated as an access port because dynamic auto is configured on the switch. Show interface gigabit 00 switch port. Once again, gigabit 00 is enabled as a switch port. It's configured for dynamic auto. It's operating as an access port even though DTP is enabled. So let's change that by going on to gigabit 00 and typing switch port, and we have a few options. So let's say mode, dynamic, which is setting the trunking mode to dynamically negotiate access or trunk mode, and we can either use auto or desirable. So I'm going to configure this as desirable. So previously on switch 1, when we typed show interface gigabit 00 switch port, it was operating as a static access port. What is it doing now? So show interface gigabit 00 switch port. This side is using dynamic auto, but the mode negotiated is a trunk port using the ISL encapsulation. It's not using 802.1q, it's using ISL. On this side, show interface gigabit 00 switch port. Notice this side is dynamic desirable. Switch 1 is dynamic auto, but we configured switch 2 to use desirable. So switch 2 initiated trunking with switch 1, and it negotiated to use ISL, and hence it's become a trunk. So when both sides are configured for auto, it doesn't become a trunk. When one side is configured for auto and the other side is using desirable, a trunk will be formed. So once again, to prove that, let's go back onto the interface, and I'll change the mode to auto. I'll shut it down and then no shut it so that they can negotiate once again. On this side, notice static access, it is no longer a trunk. And on this side once again, notice it's using a static access port. Because neither side are initiating trunking, the port remains an access port and doesn't become a trunk. If either side or both sides are configured to use desirable, the port will become a trunk port. So let's configure both sides as dynamic desirable. I'll shut it down and then no shut it. Show interface gigabit 00 switch port. Both sides are configured for dynamic desirable. So the link has become a trunk port. We can also use the command show interface trunk. And as we can see here, gigabit 00 is a trunk port, mode is desirable, and the encapsulation is ISL. Native VLAN is 1. All VLANs are allowed across the port. We'll see something similar on switch 1. So show interface trunk, mode is desirable, ISL is being used. I'll set this side back to auto, shut it down, no shut it, do show interface trunk, show interface trunk. We haven't got a trunk configured at the moment. Let's see this side, show interface trunk. Took a while, but it's now negotiated to use a trunk with switch 2. The mode on the left is auto. The mode on the right is desirable. So these two switches on gigabit 00 have negotiated to use trunking because one side, in this case switch 2, is initiating the trunking. However, if we change that again to auto, show interface trunk, we don't see any trunking. On this side, we don't see any trunking. If we look at the interface, you can see it's an access port. So no trunking has taken place.